Good morning, Dan and Amy. So this case that has received international attention, the four individuals who kidnapped, bound, tortured this special needs young man, 18 years old, last week. They were arraigned on Friday.
Yep, and denied bond.
Denied bond.
Thank goodness.
I want to talk more generally about these sorts of cases and what it says about where our culture is. Is this just kind of one-off, or is there something that is changing in our culture that needs to be acknowledged and discussed? Is there something going on? Because it's very interesting that all of a sudden you've got the Don Levins of the world. I mean, you've got these vacuous CNN newsreaders like a Don Levin.
And Ron Mott from MSNBC, too.
All of a sudden, mom and dad matter. Who knew? Oh, where's mom and dad with respect to the four kids? You have other people saying, where was mom and dad with respect to the victim in the crime? I think a bit unfairly, but okay.
Yeah.
All of a sudden, mom and dad matter. I thought the last 50 years of the war on poverty was that mom and dad don't matter. Government can be mom and dad.
Well, speaking of mom and dad, apparently the assailants were in contact with the special needs kids' parents.
During the course of the attack, the defendant Hill communicates with the victim's mother and demands $300 ransom in exchange for getting her son back.
And they did a little bit more than we originally thought.
So then it wasn't just horseplay, as their attorney first intimated.
Ugh.
Yeah, of course.
Well, that's what they're saying, that they were play fighting. It got a little out of hand, so the two sisters, decided to tie him up. Here's the assistant state's attorney.
Defendants Hill and Cooper yelled and screamed at the victim while defendant Hill was armed with a knife. The victim was made to say, "I love black people, Trump," and they made the victim kiss the floor.
Yeah.
Besides drinking toilet water, it was just a graphic, horrific video.
And then the other issue that's raised, and it's even being raised again by some of these vacuous newsreaders, so this is not a teachable moment, is the possibility of the existence of evil, which we normally don't want to confront when you have these mass murders and so forth. It's always there's a chemical imbalance. There's some kind of triggering that happened in society that's to blame. We need to kind of look at all of ourselves. We're all accomplices to some mass murderer's rampage. But now you have people saying, maybe there's just this thing called evil. Maybe evil exists in the world. So for more on this, pleased to be joined by Theodore Dalrymple. He is a licensed psychiatrist, practiced psychiatry in prisons in Britain for a long time. His latest book, which I highly recommend, Admirable Evasions, in addition to all of his work, is one of the great social commentators of, the last 50 years. Really, really good work at the City Journal, the Manhattan Institute, as well as a number of excellent books. Theodore Dalrymple, thanks so much for joining us again. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
So when this case arose last week, I immediately thought of you, and I went to kind of do a little bit of research, and I pulled up a piece you wrote some time ago, more than 10 years ago, called The Frivolity of Evil. And I wonder if you could explain what you meant by that phrase, and if you think that some of your observations in that piece and that phrase specifically has application in this case.
Well, it's a terrible thing to have to admit, but I can't quite remember what I said in this article, except, of course, that it would have been the truth. But,
of course, yes.
But I think I've certainly seen cases very similar to this one in Chicago, actually. And the question, these things have always happened. As you say, evil is a permanent possibility for mankind. I think the question is whether this kind of behavior is more frequent or less frequent than it once was.
Well, before we get,
if so, if it is more frequent, why it should be more frequent?
Before we get to the frequency of evil, I want to get to the essence of it. And in this piece that I referenced, I'll help refresh your recollection, put you on the stand here. You write about the frivolity of evil, the elevation of passing pleasure for oneself over the long-term misery of others to whom one owes a duty. What better phrase than the frivolity of evil describes the conduct of, for example, a mother who turns her own 14-year-old child out of doors because her latest boyfriend does not want him or her in the house. When you say passing pleasure for oneself over the long-term misery of others to whom one owes a duty, what do you mean by that?
Well, what I mean is that one considers only one's own immediate interest without reference to anybody else. And one has to remember also that there is actually quite a lot of pleasure, unfortunately, for many people, and perhaps all people surreptitiously, in inflicting hardship and suffering on others. And a lot of people enjoy doing that. So it is a permanent temptation. And if it's not controlled by any moral feeling, then the worst things can happen.
So what was your reaction when you heard about, I'm assuming that you saw the video of these 4 African-American teenagers and how they tormented this mentally challenged
Yes, I mean, actually what
kid?
struck me very much, perhaps this is slightly frivolous, but I saw photographs of these 4 people, and I thought that evil was actually written all over their faces.
Mm.
They are the kind of people that one would give a wide berth to. You wouldn't, if you saw them coming towards you, you'd miss them, you'd avoid them. Now, what was very interesting about the expression on their face was not merely that they were insolent, but that they, and hateful, but they appeared, to me anyway, self-righteous as well. They could not conceive that anything that they did would be wrong. Now, of course, I'm reading a lot into their faces,
I know what you're
but that's what it appeared to me to be like.
Well, and so you mentioned you maybe you've been involved in cases similar to this during your time as a psychiatrist in the prison system. These types of individuals we're discussing, and there was a case in Idaho that was adjudicated partially last month, very similar. The 3 football players taking advantage of, sexually assaulting, frankly, a special needs teammate in Idaho. Are these individuals, can they be rehabilitated, if that's even an appropriate phrase? I mean, what has been your interaction with people who display the kind of characteristics you're talking about and their ability to, at any point become, law-abiding members of society, as it were?
Well, in a sense, I think that's the wrong question. But
Okay.
if I answer it, I think to expect people who have done the kind of things these 4 young people did, or some of the other things I've seen done, just as terrible, actually. Although I would say that there's something special about this case, which I'll talk about in a minute. But to expect them suddenly to realize that what they've done, or even slowly to realize what they've done is wrong, is absurd. It's ludicrous.
Mm-hmm.
Well, how do you?
Are they going to say, "Oh, I now realize that taking a mentally handicapped person and torturing him is wrong. I didn't realize it before."
Mm-hmm.
Well, how do you think?
Seems to me ludicrous.
Yeah, how do you think social media though has played into evil tendencies?
Well, I think one of the things that struck me about this case is that it was given a kind of ideological veneer, that there was some kind of political purpose to it, and that political purpose, in a sense, justified it in the minds of the perpetrators, so that they were not just torturing this person, which they obviously enjoyed doing, but they were right to do so because they had been the victims of injustice, or their group had been the victims of injustice, and so on. And this is a way of thinking that I'm afraid has been assiduously promoted
And so
over the last, 50 years or so.
Go back to the other point that you were going to make then, the idea of rehabilitating is the wrong question, and it's something else you wanted to say about these individuals.
Well, I was going to, what I wanted to talk about in these individuals is the kind of ideological veneer, if you like, the ideological justification for their sadism.
One other thing that you've written is kind of interesting, this whole kind of paid their debt to society, We hear this a lot when we talk about ex-offenders and criminal justice reform, so pay their debts to society. And you also say that kind of anodyne phrase is sort of devoid of meaning, that there is no way, for example, in this case, to repay the damage that you've done.
No, and in fact, the idea of repayment, as if it's double entry bookkeeping, is ludicrous, because you could say, well, supposing they did their punishment or whatever it is in advance, before they'd done anything, would they then be allowed to go and do what they did? Punishment is not. Is not a matter of double entry bookkeeping.
Well,
3 years in prison doesn't equal a burglary.
When you have these kind of atrocious cases, people want, and I do too, want to look at cultural factors. What could give rise to this sort of evil? And so we talk about the state of the family. We talk about the relative respect for the sanctity of human life and society. Do you, and again, in your experience dealing with cases like this, are there cultural factors that really do exacerbate the likelihood of the incidence of these things, or is that a reach?
I think there are. I mean, I think the way, I don't want to sound like a complete determinist, but the fact is that if you think in a certain way, you're more likely to behave in a certain way. And one has, if you look at people's propensity to do evil, no doubt there is a normal distribution. There are some people who, for whatever reason, are born more likely to commit evil. But you can move the whole distribution either in the direction of people doing more evil or less evil. And if you, a society in which people feel, constantly feel victimized and therefore, in a sense, justified in their own bad behavior, then you must expect more of this kind of behavior.
He is Theodore Dalrymple, retired psychiatrist, the author of many books, the most recent Admirable Evasions. Theodore Dalrymple, thanks so much for joining us. Appreciate your time and insights.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you. And he joined us on our turnkey.pro answer line.
It's like